Hello and welcome to the Dissect and Connect podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wade. This is the podcast where we explore population health issues impacting your community. Dissect and Connect is a service of New River Valley Community Services and the Montgomery County Prevention Partners. Annette Clark is Family Services Director with the Central Western Virginia chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Annette received her bachelor's degree in psychology sociology and her master's in science degree in gerontology from Virginia Commonwealth University. Before joining the Alzheimer's Association in 2004, she had 19 years of experience working with persons living with dementia at the Adult Care Center of Roanoke Valley. She is a certified dementia practitioner, adjunct faculty with Virginia Commonwealth University, and an instructor for the Department of Social Services. So Annette, welcome to the Dissect and Connect podcast.
Thank you so much for having me join you today, Mike. I appreciate it.
So let's jump right in and talk about Alzheimer's and the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Certainly. There are over 5.8 million Americans that are currently living with Alzheimer's disease. We do know that there are over 100 types of dementia, but Alzheimer's disease makes up the largest portion of that, making up about 70 to 80% of the cause of dementia.
Yeah, and I know that Alzheimer's and dementia, those terms get used interchangeably, it seems like. Is there any need to be more distinctive about that when people are talking about those two?
Thank you for asking that question, Mike. I can't tell you how many times I get asked that. And yes, they are often used interchangeably, but they do not mean the same thing. So we'll do just kind of a quick overview of that. If you think about dementia as being the signs and symptoms of something, it's more of a syndrome, if you will. If you think about loss of memory or poor judgment or inability to effectively communicate, those are all the signs and symptoms, and that's dementia. Alzheimer's disease is just one of the causes of dementia, just one of the diseases that might cause an individual to have some of those symptoms. Certainly there's vascular-related dementia, there's an alcohol-related dementia, there's dementia that goes hand in hand with some individuals living with Parkinson's. And so there are many other causes of dementia other than Alzheimer's disease.
That's good to know. Thank you for clarifying. Let's talk about risk factors.
Certainly, age is the biggest risk factor. We know that 1 out of every 10 individuals over the age of 65 go on to develop some form of dementia. And so whether that's a Alzheimer's type dementia or vascular related dementia, so it is a significant cause. Age, female, we do know that more females go on to develop dementia than males. And people ask us all the time, well, why is that the case? Is it because women live longer? And certainly, I've already said that age is one of the risk factors, and so you would think that might be the issue. But when we factor in age and life expectancy, still more women go on to develop dementia than men. We know that family history sometimes plays a part in that. We know that head trauma can also be a risk factor. And certainly there are lifestyle choices that make individuals at a much higher risk. We know that if an individual has uncontrolled hypertension or they have diabetes that they're not really monitoring successfully or treating successfully, some of those things can put people at a much higher risk. And so the Alzheimer's Association is passionate. While we don't know a cure and we don't know the cause yet, we do know that there are lifestyle choices that can put people at higher risk. And we know that things like hypertension, not monitoring glucose levels, not monitoring their own mental health, not monitoring sleep habits, and having sleep deprivation can put people at a higher risk.
So if you have a loved one that you're concerned about possibly developing dementia or Alzheimer's, what are some signs and symptoms to look for?
Certainly, Mike. We ask that question a lot as well. It's memory loss that's new, and it's memory loss, it's changes in their ability to remember things. It's visual spatial changes. Like an individual that was always a good driver and suddenly they've had 3 car accidents in the past year. That might be something related to visual spatial relationship changes. Poor judgment, and that could be related around money or around what type of clothing to wear. They might start to have issues with communication, word finding problems. Those are some of the red flags that we have. And when families contact us and they say, I have looked at the website and my loved one is really exhibiting most of those 10 signs on a regular basis, what should I do? We certainly encourage family members to go talk with their primary care physician if that's who they are used to seeing. And if the person is receiving Medicare, they will automatically receive an annual cognitive screening. So that will be handled that way. But maybe the person's a little bit younger, they don't have Medicare benefits at this point. The family can mention to the primary care physician, hey, I'm concerned about some of these issues with my loved one, and they can start to do some of those screenings. What we try to do is to have families acknowledge these issues early on into the disease process, because we know that early diagnosis is important. While we don't have a cure, there are some medications that are available that can help keep people functioning at the current level for a little bit longer. But the other part of that, Mike, is that the individual can start to make life plans themselves. They can start to acknowledge what they would like their life to look like going forward. So they get to have some say in it. So when a person goes to the primary care physician's office and maybe says, I'm concerned about my memory, can we do some testing? The primary care physician has just a few questions that they can answer, that they can ask the individual. And if they answer a certain way that's a red flag, they may even give a referral to a neurologist, a psychologist that might be doing some testing. And so they can do a little bit deeper dive. But what we do with individuals is we try to rule out other causes. You know, we know that depression can often look like dementia, but we can treat depression. So let's make sure that it's not that. If the person has issues with thyroid, maybe we need to check thyroid levels and make sure that is right. B12 deficiencies can cause people to have a confused appearance. So let's rule out all of those things that we can change. Is it a medication that is maybe causing this person to seem a little bit more confused? Is it dehydration? Is there an underlying issue like an infection that's just not being treated?
I mentioned in introducing you to the audience today that you are the Family Services Director for the Central Western Virginia chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Tell me a little bit more about what your job looks like. What does that involve?
I have the best job in the world because I have the opportunity to help people's lives be better, to help an older adult who's living with dementia have the best life that they can possibly have. And so I get to work with that person. I get to look at strength-based activities. What can we do that person can still remain engaged in? I also get to work with that caregiver and say, okay, well, these are concerns that you're dealing with. How can we make it easier for you as a caregiver or care partner by either introducing them to resources or doing some education with them, maybe helping that caregiver to understand the importance of effective communication, never trying to argue or disagree with that person living with dementia, because if you do, then you're likely going to lose that argument, because that person living with dementia, their brain is actually telling them that what they're saying is factual.
Right.
And so that caregiver arguing, saying, nope, that's really black. It's not brown. It's to no benefit. So helping the caregiver to understand the importance of rethinking the way that they are communicating with their loved one is very important.
I mean, that's really critical, and I understand from personal experience that can be a real point of frustration with families as they have an individual in their care that is struggling with this issue, to not be able to communicate with them or to to rationalize what they're saying or verbalizing can be incredibly frustrating. I would imagine that's a pretty common thing, right?
It is very common. And just helping that person to rethink the way that they're saying something. We never are able to bring that person living with dementia to our own reality. And there's no use in trying to do that. In order to more effectively communicate with someone is to go to their reality. And if they are constantly asking to see a loved one that maybe has been deceased for several years, there's no value in saying, Mom, your mom died 20 years ago. I can take you to the cemetery to see her. There would be no value in that, because that person's going to start grieving again, or they're going to call that caregiver a liar, or it could just go badly in many different areas. A great way to rethink that communication when your loved one is asking to see someone that's maybe deceased is to reframe it and saying, I know that you're missing Mom. She was a great cook. She used to make the best apple pie. Let's go see if we can get a piece of apple pie and look at some pictures. And so we've met that emotional need that loved one has by saying, yes, I know that you miss her terribly. And then we've redirected them, if you will, in a more compassionate, caring way.
Well, just like so many other diseases, I mean, this one truly involves the family. I think in a lot of situations puts a lot of demands on family members to care for their loved ones. And so we're recording this and we'll be publishing this during November, which is recognized as National Family Caregivers Month. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about the role of caregivers in these situations and some of the challenges and maybe some of the ways that they can better cope with what they're faced with.
Mike, often I work with caregivers who don't even acknowledge the fact that they're caregivers. They say, I'm not really a caregiver for my mom. And I think that's the first point of it, is we have to help people to realize the important role that they have. And so often I'll spend time talking with a caregiver and say, do you wake up each day feeling the responsibility for someone's health, for their well-being, to make sure that they are safe throughout the day? And if that person says, yeah, I do, then that means they're a caregiver. Now, a caregiver can take on many different roles. It could be that caregiver who only is available or only helps mom in case of an emergency. She's fallen and she needs to get to the doctor. That's a caregiver. Mm-hmm. If that person pays that person's bills for them and makes sure that their groceries are in the house so they can cook, that's a caregiver. Sometimes there's a caregiver that's in the home 24/7, 365 days out of the year that are providing hands-on care. That's a caregiver. But then there are caregivers who maybe the mom lives in this area, the New River Valley area, but maybe she lives in Texas, but every day she wakes up and she goes into her job, but her main thoughts are, I'm hoping that mom's taking her medication while she's there. I hope that she hasn't fallen. I hope that she's eaten. That's still a caregiver. And so caregiving can take on many different ways, if you want to think of it that way. But at the end of the day, you are a caregiver if you worry about someone else's safety. So who are caregivers? We know that women take up a big portion of this. You know, there are over 16 million caregivers for those 5.8 million individuals living with the disease. And so 16 million caregivers providing more than 244 billion hours of unpaid care. Wow. That's a lot of care. So who are these people that are providing this care? We know that women, now this is not to say that there aren't plenty. There are excellent male caregivers out there. There's not at all to say that they're not, because they are. But when you look at the statistics, research tells us time and time again that this is a disease that significantly impacts women. Not only are women at higher risk of developing the disease, but they are traditionally the caregivers. 2/3 of them, actually. Wow. And so even if it's the daughter, the wife, or the daughter-in-law that are picking up most of the caregiving role, then they are significantly impacted. But, when I talk about this disease being a disease for the entire family, it is not only that primary caregiver. I often speak about the secondary caregivers. So maybe it's the wife that's providing the care, but it's that husband who is trying to support and hold up that wife while she is doing that 24/7 caregiving. So he's a caregiver in and of himself. And then I will say to you that the children play a significant role in this. Several years ago, I did some research about how this is impacting that, maybe if grandma moves into your home while you are 15 years old, and then suddenly your life significantly changes because you can't have sleepovers because grandma gets angry easily, and if there's too much noise in the house, then she's fussing at everyone. Or maybe that child is actually providing care as well. Statistics tell us that there are over 250,000 American children ages 8 to 18 that are providing hands-on care. These are children that have stepped up to the plate, Mike, if you will. These are children that are not just sitting with grandma while mom goes to the grocery store for 20 minutes to get bread and milk. These are kids that are actually helping to help mom with, or grandmother with ADLs, activities of daily living, whether that's eating, bathing, toileting, dressing.
I remember, I was lucky enough to have known my great-grandparents up until I was in my 20s, and I remember when my great-grandfather was diagnosed and started to go downhill. I was 17, 18, helping give him a bath and get him in and out of the tub. So, it definitely is a family issue.
It is, and I'm sure that helped to shape who you are and what you have chosen to do as a career.
What are the biggest concerns about family caregivers? What are the common concerns or challenges that they have that could potentially even harm their own health?
I work with families all the time, and they will say, I'm really not stressed. I just need you to help me get respite for my loved one. And certainly I can talk about resources that are available to get support for respite. I can always talk about that, but I always want to talk with that caregiver about the 10 signs of caregiver stress. And I will tell a story about a caregiver that I worked with who showed up at my office one day with that very same scenario and said, I'm not worried about myself. I'm worried about my mom, which is very, very common. But I said, I can handle these services for your mom. Let me talk about you after we do that. And so I went through all of those signs of caregiver stress, and they are denial and anger and withdrawal and new health issues. We know that many caregivers predecease the person that they are providing care for because of the stress. We talk about the longevity of a diagnosis, and an individual can live with a diagnosis from 8 to 20 years. That's a lot of caregiving years. And so what we are seeing is those caregivers that go on to develop or be at a higher risk of developing their own health issues because of that stress. That old thing that says, if you don't manage stress, it will manage you. And it often does with caregivers, because we see those caregivers who never had an issue with hypertension that have now suddenly become hypertensive, or never had really issues with glucose levels or migraines or any other issue. And now that stress is starting to build up, we're seeing that they are having those issues themselves. And so we see that. And then another thing that often happens with caregivers, especially if they're females that have taken on the lead in the caregiving role, is they give up their own financial security to go provide care. So if we've got this wonderful daughter who's maybe making a great salary in the dream job of her life, and all of a sudden she realizes that she needs to put her loved one at a priority, which is very, very good thing to do. But often that puts that caregiver at risk because she's giving up her full-time job, which means she's given up her retirement benefits and those other things. And that can put that caregiver at risk as well.
So what kind of supports or resources are available for caregivers who are perhaps at that point where they're really struggling with their own health issues?
Some of the resources that the Alzheimer's Association have to offer is the 24/7, 365 days out of the year helpline. So, Mike, if there's a caregiver who is in distress, who is struggling to get mom to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning because she just is wide awake and very agitated, then they can call us, and there will be a master's level clinician that can walk them through whatever issue is occurring at that moment. They can give them some ideas, some things to put in their toolkit, if you will, some suggestions of things to redirect. Okay? The other part of that helpline is not only can we offer that and talk about resources that are available, whether it be adult day centers in the area or companion services or elder law attorneys or any of those resources that we can chat with caregivers about. But sometimes it's just that caregiver who calls it at 3 o'clock in the morning because they've had the worst day of their life, and they want someone to acknowledge that this is really not what they signed up for, that this is not what they had in mind for their retirement years. And so that's another great thing that the helpline can do. Another great resource is our website, and it is my go-to whenever I have an issue. So we can get anything from any educational program. Say you wanted to learn about all of those 10 signs that I just gave you a few of, and you said, I want to do a little bit deeper dive into those 10 signs. You can visit our website and listen to a pre-recorded program about the 10 signs. Or maybe you clearly know that your loved one's already gotten a diagnosis. You just want to learn more about understanding Alzheimer's disease and what are some things that I may need to do. And so you might visit our website and hop on an Understanding Alzheimer's and Dementia workshop, or you might hop on, and we know that caregiving takes on different roles as the person navigates through this disease process. And so a caregiver or a care partner that's working with someone in the early stages has very, very different needs from a caregiver who's maybe providing care for someone in the late stages of the disease. That caregiving role looks completely different. And so what we've done is on our website, we've done a program called Understanding Alzheimer's and the early stage caregiver, the middle stage caregiver, the late stage caregiver. So the caregiver can certainly hop on and listen to all of them, or just listen to exactly what they need at the time that they need it. Sometimes they want to just learn more about maybe why their loved one is exhibiting a certain behavior, or how they can more effectively communicate. All of those things are on our website, in addition to a wealth of information about the latest research that's out there. If you cut on the news each day, you learn something new about Alzheimer's disease. We are daily finding out new things. We're daily looking at medications that are in the pipeline that are being tested. You find that on our website as well. You can also find ways to get linked up. If you are passionate about helping us to find a cure, you can go on the website and get involved with Trial Match, where we actually link persons living with disease, caregivers, and even individuals who have no disease but have just a passion about helping to find a cure. We need well volunteers just as badly as we need individuals that are showing signs. So Trial Match is on there. You can learn more about what we are doing as far as our Walk to End Alzheimer's and our Longest Day, which celebrates caregivers. In this month of caregiving, we really want to focus in and look at the extremely important role that caregivers play in this. And I want to say, Mike, that many caregivers take on the role of being a caregiver, not in a burdensome, I must do this martyrish way. Many of those caregivers take on that role because they want to provide that care. They know that mom or grandmother or grandfather or whoever gave them the best quality of care that they could. And so this is an opportunity for them to give back. And so that's why some of the caregivers take on this role. Some caregivers do it just because, in all honesty, they want to keep them at home. And this is an opportunity for them to do it. Sometimes it's more financially based. Maybe there are not a lot of resources available in their community, and money is an issue. So caregivers take on this role for a lot of different reasons. And I will be honest, sometimes caregivers take on this role because there's no one else to do it. And sometimes it's not always a positive experience. And so, it can be a very wide range, but what we are there for is to support all of those caregivers, to coalesce those resources around them and to wrap our arms around them and to help family members know that while sometimes it does feel like they're alone during this caregiving role, that they're not, that we are there for them all of the time, and that we can direct them to resources. And that kind of wraps us back to that whole COVID experience and how COVID has changed the way the Alzheimer's Association is doing our great work. I will say to you that while COVID is certainly increasing, Alzheimer's disease has not stopped, and neither will we at the association. We are still as passionate about finding a cause. We are still doing all of that great research, and we are still supporting those caregivers on a daily basis by doing educational programs virtually. Prior to COVID, we might have educational programs where we would reach 25, 30 folks and think, this is great success. Now we are actually reaching a higher number of individuals with some of our educational programs because they are able to do them from the safety of their own home. And so we have seen an increase in the number of attendees at our educational program. We've seen an increase in the number of helpline calls. Those caregivers and there was initially a dip. I will say that because caregivers were kind of trying to take care of whatever was initially thrown into their lap. Maybe we had a caregiver who was surviving okay, and their loved one went to adult day 5 days a week, and they had some family come in on the weekend, and they were managing quite fine. And then when COVID happened, they may have lost their adult day services, they may have lost their companion services that were coming in the home, and caregivers were shocked, and just like the rest of us, we're like, well, what do we do now? And so caregivers are now starting to call Helpline at an increased opportunity. And also, we're seeing that those caregivers' needs have increased. So maybe a call that used to take 15 minutes might now take an hour. And that's okay if that's what's needed by that caregiver to help them to get on a path of whatever resource is needed. Our support groups went virtual. All of our support groups are done just like a Zoom call or a over the phone call. So none of that has changed. We're still there for them.
You, I think, mentioned that for at least some caregivers, maybe the problems that they're experiencing have become more challenging in COVID. Is that what you said?
Yes. Sometimes we see an increase, like the rest of us, individuals living with a dementia diagnosis need routine. They need that to help them to manage in a more successful way. When they are out of their routine, whenever the pattern changes, that's when you start to see behaviors increase, whether it's agitation or confusion or depression. All of those things can start to be amplified by being quarantined. And so we have seen that those caregivers have seen an increase in some of those behaviors. And so what we've tried to do is to do educational programs that were specifically focused on in-home caregivers. What are those caregivers doing that can maybe make their evenings a little bit better? We know that sometimes in the evening hours when it gets dark and maybe their loved one that's living with dementia is overly tired or overly stimulated, sometimes we'll see behaviors increase. And it used to be called sundowning, and whatever the term you want to call it, but we do know that that does increase in the evening hours. So what we have done is we've started to develop some programs to talk caregivers through that. Well, these are some things that you can put in your toolkit, if you will, when you start to see that agitation increase in the afternoon. Maybe it's as simple closing the blinds so they are not seeing the shadows in the window, cutting on additional lighting in the house to make sure, keeping the person engaged in the routine as much as possible, as much as we can all have routine.
Right.
So looking at those things, just those simple suggestions have helped caregivers. And then, Mike, what we have seen is we have also been called a great deal by those caregivers who have their loved ones in a facility or in a community. And they are struggling because they cannot visit their loved one the same way that they used to. And they miss them. And they have that grief about missing them or not being able to visit. And how can we help that caregiver kind of navigate that experience, whether it's the use of technology or being more creative in their communication with staff, or, is it a way that we can, promote window visits? Or now that communities are opening up, it's getting a little bit easier, but we're seeing a huge increase in the numbers. So what will that look like going forward? And, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention the holidays and how the holidays are going to look different for all of us, And we're all struggling to think, well, how's Thanksgiving going to look for us? Or how's Christmas going to look for us? Well, factor in if you are the person living with a dementia diagnosis or you're that caregiver for that person living with dementia. And now you have an expectation of maybe having the holidays look the way they used to. And we all know the holidays are not going to look the same for any of us.
Right.
But then you factor in, well, how can I make the best of this situation? Because we know that these are different times, but how can we incorporate visits with family where we can use Zoom or however we want to do it, so we can embrace these caregivers who may be even more socially distanced and anxious during the holiday time.
Yeah, I was going to say, for a lot of caregivers of individuals that have dementia or Alzheimer's, the social isolation piece is nothing new for them. They, in a lot of cases, I think, tend to be more socially isolated because of the fact that they're caring for somebody on such a regular basis. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. I work with many caregivers who've not taken that traditional summer vacation to the beach in years because they just don't have that opportunity. They don't have care for their moms, and it's too confusing or too challenging to take their loved one on that vacation. So often that caregiver just chooses to not do the vacation. Right. And even daily tasks, even prior to COVID, if you are the caregiver 24/7 for a loved one, it's challenging to take them to church services anymore because they don't understand the sermon, or they may say something that's a little challenging for others to understand. Right. Often the caregiver will stay at home with them versus doing that particular activity, even something as simple as grocery shopping. Many of our caregivers, prior to COVID, didn't even go grocery shopping. Yeah. It just was easier to give the list to the daughter who could run by the store to pick up the items. And then before you know it, their caregiver's not been out of their home for 2 to 3 months. And now can you layer on COVID and how much more challenging that has been for them?
Yeah, it's 2020 has been a difficult year, and for families in this situation, I can't even imagine what that must look like for them. I did want to ask you, Annette, why you chose this line of work.
I am a gerontologist by trade, and so I love working with older adults. And the field of gerontology is a great opportunity, because I can work with the older adults, but I can also work with those caregivers. So I get the best of both worlds, I think. I am fascinated by nutrition, by exercise, and the benefits of healthy aging. I often talk about being a geek about blue zone research and looking at centenarians and looking at that group of individuals that are aging successfully, and what are they doing that maybe some other groups of the population are not doing. And that kind of links back into the work that the Alzheimer's Association is focusing on lifestyle choices and ways to love your brain. And a lot of it just really fits so nicely into that blue zone research. And then we look at the importance of diet and exercise, and we look at that not all exercise is the same, and how can we help people to choose more wisely. And so that's kind of why I chose this field. I always wanted to help individuals. And to be quite honest, when I first started my career back many, many years ago with a degree in mental health and psychology and sociology, working with older adults was not on the radar. I wanted to work with children. And one of my professors at the time mentioned an opportunity at an adult day center. And he said, to get your foot in the door, you work in human services for a while, and, then you can move on. Well, 19 years later, I moved on. Once I was there, I found that it was my niche. It was where my passion lay. And, then came a degree in gerontology, which just cemented it. But that's why. Thank you for asking that.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be sure to include the helpline number and the Alzheimer's Association website link in our show notes for today's episode. But before we go, I wanted to see if maybe you could share some parting words of wisdom with our listeners.
I think that I just want to say, caregivers are my heroes. I have worked with the association, as Mike mentioned in my introduction. I've been with the association for 16 years. And prior to that, I worked with the Adult Day Center for 19 years. So I've been in this field for a long time. And I have seen some amazing caregivers. You're my heroes. You do it 24/7, 365 days out of the year, and you do it lovingly. And, thank you, because if you didn't do that, I'm not sure where we would be. So the wraparound to that is, while I know that you do a great job, please realize you don't have to do it alone, that there is a wealth of resources out there, whether it's the Alzheimer's Association, area agencies on aging, CSB, community service boards. There are all kinds of organizations that are out there to support you. And I would say, don't be such a hero that you don't ask for help, because every superhero has to have help every now and then. So when somebody says, "How can I help you?" I want you to be ready with a list of ways that people can offer support. Many caregivers will say, no, I don't think you can help me, because maybe they think no one can do it the same way. And maybe they can't. Maybe they can't provide that care the same way that caregiver would do it, but they can do a good job. So let those people, I genuinely believe that if someone asks a caregiver how they can help, that they truly want to do it. So have that list and be ready to say, I would love it if you could come pick up some medication for my husband and just drop it at the doorstep for us. That would be very helpful. Or, maybe you could provide a side dish for a holiday event. Anything like that they could do for a caregiver would be greatly appreciated these days.
Those little things add up.
Indeed, they do.
Annette, you've been incredibly generous with your time, and just appreciate you being on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
You as well, Mike. Anytime.
Dissect and Connect is sponsored by Teen Connections, a leadership program through Planned Parenthood South Atlantic that empowers youth with the facts about sexual health and the skills to build stronger, healthier relationships. It's free, totally virtual, and you can earn $100 when you graduate as a Teen Connections peer educator in your community. Join a Teen Connections program from home today. For more information, be sure to check out the show notes from today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Dissect and Connect podcast. To learn more about Montgomery County Prevention Partners, or New River Valley Community Services, be sure to check us out on Facebook or visit nrvcs.org/podcast.